Knobloch's Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, Process Production and Social Media. Hey knowers, welcome to our podcast. We are Knobloch's Dance, a social media-based company. We strive to say no to the box. We connect interdisciplinary art, technology, and artists to re-envision the process of art making and sharing.
Hello everyone, welcome to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. This is Yejin.
And this is Reina. For this episode, we got to interview wonderful Miguel Gutierrez, who is a choreographer, composer, performer, singer, writer, educator, and advocate, who's currently living in New York and has been living there for around 20 or some years.
And we had great time talking with him and took his class called Baby, This Is What You Came For at TDIF. We really enjoyed this class, Reina, right?
Yes, so it was super fun because it was very experimental. We were going outside of our comfort zone, and and so we got to create a lot of things, but he even got to show us a solo snippet of him.
I loved it.
Yeah, it was so fun.
Yeah, but you cannot break some of the items in room, but he almost. So it was really fun to watch his learning performance, present quality as well. In this episode, he talks about what is the time-based nature of performance means, and he also introduces his creative process in art making. You know, my favorite part of our conversation was when we talked about social media. He said, "You guys tortured me," and he gave us great examples.
Literally.
The advantage and disadvantages of social media in dance.
Yeah, it was so funny because we kept going back to the social media talk, and like you said, it was like, this is torture. Are you trying to torture me? But it was always like, not about torture. It was always so funny.
Right. So it was good to see both sides because we all, I think about that way in terms of social media in dance.
Yeah, for sure. And I think he really clearly talked about it. Like he talks about the positive and then the negative in a very clear way.
Right. And if you're a non-dance major, you can also learn what is dance improvisational practice. And he gave us great examples of how his Feldenkrais method certification helped him to understand and teach improvisation in both rehearsal and in workshop process.
Yeah, that was really nice to hear because I think sometimes he brought this idea of time that he uses in his choreographic process, and just clarifying those ideas was really interesting. And of course, you guys are going to hear all about this.
Right.
While you
and
listening.
Lastly, Knobloch's Dance would like to say thank you to TDIF committee who helped us to set this interview and collaborated with us. So thank you so much.
Yes, TDIF.
Without further ado, welcome to our podcast, Miguel.
He is currently here in Denton, Texas, made his way all the way down from New York. So we're really excited to have you here. But as we continue, can you briefly walk our audience through your career path? What do you do? What do you focus in?
All right. So what I do is the main thing of what I do is I create dance-based performances that, we use this term evening length, which usually means somewhere between 45 minutes to like an hour and a half or longer, depending on the piece, that's centered around some sort of specific theme or investigation. And I can get back to that in a second, but then, I would also say that my work also involves my teaching, which is a huge part of what I do. It also involves a lot of advocacy for the field, and it also involves a lot of mentoring of younger artists. So I kind of see all of that as my work, but then I also have a life as a singer and as a music maker, both kind of like music that I've made for my work and for some other people's work, and also singing involved. I have a project right now that's called Sedana, which is sad versions of Madonna songs. And that's increasingly kind of having like a touring life as well. So those are all the kind of main things that I guess I would say that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know if it's helpful to talk about like how I got there or what you.
Yeah, I think before we start talking about how you got there, can you talk a little bit about your teaching and your advocacy work?
Yeah.
Yeah. What is that focus on?
Yeah. Well, I teach in so many different places and contexts. So I've been teaching since I was 14 years old.
Wow.
I started teaching gymnastics when I was a kid. I was an assistant instructor to my teacher, and then I taught like jazz class for a year when I was 16. And then when I got to college, I was asked to do like substitute teaching for the professors, which was a little messed up, to be honest. But
in college?
Yeah. And then pretty soon when I left school and I was working professionally, about a year and a half into working professionally, I was like complaining, as I often am. It's like, somebody should think about this. And I was like, there's no beginning dance classes in San Francisco. Like I was living in San Francisco at the time. And the choreographer who I used to work for, Joe Good, was like, why don't you start one? And so I started teaching. I mean, I guess I was like 23, 24 at the most. And I got a following. And by the time I left San Francisco when I was 25, I was teaching like 4 to 6 times a week. I was teaching technique classes. And then I had also started teaching aerobics. And then I moved to New York. And eventually a few years later, I also started teaching technique classes again. But then I used to live in a live-work space, like a loft in Bushwick, way back before Bushwick became kind of known as what it's known as now. And so I also started leading workshops, and I started leading workshops in improvisation. And a few years after that, when I noticed that like every young artist was making work because there were no dance jobs to be had, I started leading workshops in composition. And so it kind of was always about what was the next thing I was interested in thinking about or talking about. And so part of how I like learned about it was that I taught it, because in teaching it, suddenly you have to kind of like come up with, well, what do I believe in this, or what do I believe about this? And then, I kept teaching technique for quite some time, but then I became pretty, disillusioned with it, or just confused by it. It didn't feel like that interesting to me to do, and it didn't feel like that was wasn't the place where my ideas were being served. So then I kind of stopped teaching that, and then I didn't mention this in the first thing, but like I became trained as a practitioner of the Feldenkrais method, this kind of somatic method. So that also started to become a big part of my life and my teaching.
That's cool.
Started teaching Feldenkrais as well.
What kind of technique you taught before, or what was your idea about? What's the definition of technique?
Well, I think strictly for me, technique just means how you do something. So I think sometimes technique is mistakenly thought of as like ballet technique, or a kind of traditional modern dance technique. But I think if we really look at the word, it just means how you do something. So there are, of course, many techniques, because there are many ways of dancing. There are many forms. There are many styles. One technique might not actually be applicable in another form. So I think technique is just about how you do something. In my case, when I first started teaching technique class, I think you're always teaching what you've learned. And I first was teaching what I was doing with Joe Good, who was a choreographer I worked with in San Francisco. And so his technique, it seemed like to me, from what I understood from him, and was like kind of like something he had gotten from Viola Farber, who was a Cunningham dancer, and then had her own company. And so it was kind of like somewhat of a watered down Cunningham technique. And then he had kind of brought in this kind of San Francisco vibe into the work. I started teaching with that. And then when I moved to New York, I think I got a lot more information about, release technique, which was sort of this word, this cover umbrella word that was being used to describe a lot of different somatically influenced techniques in the 90s in New York. And so I studied with lots of different kinds of people. One of the big sort of techniques at the time is something called Klein-Mahler technique. And but I was also studying things that I didn't really necessarily know what the origins were, and then later came to realize they were Feldenkrais, Bartenieff fundamentals, body mind centering. I studied a little bit with David Zambrano before I left San Francisco because he came and did a workshop. So I was teaching some of his floor stuff. So it was kind of this like hodgepodge really of all these different things, like a patchwork quilt of all these different things. And I would just remember certain exercises from certain people that really had a big influence on me or had really stayed with me. And then the other thing that I was really interested in at the time was like the phrase, right? Like teaching a phrase. And so I got, I think, quite good at constructing very kinetic, very sort of like kinesthetically intelligent movement that to me made sense. I mean, it's like a little arrogant to be like, it was kinesthetically intelligent. But I mean, I think it was like it had a certain kind of flow to it that felt like, a consequence of the technical things I had taught before it. So yeah, I got pretty into that too, because it was just about like dancing.
You are listening to Navox Dance.
On your bio, we found he's fascinated by the time-based nature of performance and how it creates an idea frame for phenomenological, that's hard word, questions around presence and meaning making. Can you explain more about your definition of time-based nature performance?
Yeah.
And how it becomes an elastic material, like you said.
So, yeah, I'm a performing artist, right?
Yeah.
So one of my main mediums is time. Is thinking about how we experience time over the course of a performance. And, I think that makes it quite different than some other mediums where, it's not that you couldn't stand or in front of a painting for like an hour and a half, but you probably won't. Most of us, let's say, right? I think there's like some study that's like the average amount of time a person stands in front of a painting at a museum is like 6 seconds, if that much, So instead, what I invite people to do is like come somewhere. Usually it's a theatrical space. Usually it's about sitting and be with the situation that I've constructed for, X amount of time. So for me, that thing about it being located in time is really central because what's different over time than what you do in a short amount of time? Well, I think what's different is that you feel yourself and you contend with yourself and you reflect and you also maybe imagine and maybe you also space out and maybe you disappear for a little bit and then you come back. And so all these different kinds of things that happen over time are things that I'm thinking about when I'm presenting my work or when I create something. I've been told by others, but so now I start to believe that it's true, I guess, that people's experience of my work is that they feel this kind of push-pull thing sometimes. Like some parts of the work repels them, other parts of the work super absorbs them. And I'm always like, well, yeah, so what happens in the performance is actually you become conscious of yourself and of your experience, your subjective experience as a audience member. And that time that you're spending with me in the work isn't necessarily like it's not necessarily something as simple as something you can break down to like it's an intellectual process or exclusively a feeling process, or I don't really divide those things because your thoughts and your feelings are the same, and so I that's part of where I start to think about the elasticity because like I said, sometimes in my work, I think what happens is like time gets a little bit suspended. So you kind of lose time, like you can sort of lose a sense of where you are with a thing, and you're maybe sort of taken out of sort of like normative hetero, product oriented, forward moving time, right? Which is like the time that most of us are kind of contending with in society. It's like, keep going, don't stop, produce, we can't create rupture. Whereas in performance, you're asking people to create rupture. You're saying, no, actually step outside of the normal thing and be with something, however long it is. And it's not normal. Like sitting and watching a show, like that's weird, So it's like, especially watching a bunch of people move around in like abstract ways, it's like, well, what the hell's happening? So I think that kind of time and the different ways which sometimes it feels short, sometimes it feels long. Like sometimes you, like I said, you disappear, you go somewhere else. This to me is like the taffy-like nature of time. Some of the work that I did with choreographer Deborah Hay, who is from Austin, and she talks about tapping into your cells while you're dancing, just kind of like super esoteric, cool. But it's also like you start to consider like, well, yeah, I am actually constructed of these cells. And what if I were to be able to be in a conversation with them? And also, what if during a performance, I start to sort of truly notice the kind of reality of my physical, emotional, spiritual self. And what if the performance is some kind of conduit, exactly as you say, to that? Like, so in a way, the performance is not just a delivery system for some sort of thing that's coming at you. Rather, it's the container for the possibility of some other kind of experience of perception. Yeah,
that's so invigorating.
So cool.
Let's dig deeper.
I'm so excited. Let's dig deeper.
Go to number 3. That's the time.
So you're talking about this time and elasticity and experiences people may have in your work, and and it makes me want to know, what does your creative process look like?
It really depends on the project, So often a process is in conversation with the previous process, right? So there's things about the previous piece that either I feel like I didn't fully go as far as I could have, or I have like finished that conversation with myself and I'm ready for a different conversation. So it's all of which is just to say that each process has its own particularity. I think that for me, a process really begins with the people that I work with or that I choose to work with. I become fascinated by people. That's really where it kind of starts, while at the same time, maybe there's some sort of intellectual, conceptual fascination that is like at me, like it's getting at me, right? So it's like, if I think about the Age and Beauty series from a few years ago, there was a series of events, like a dear friend of mine took his own life, which sent me into this kind of spiral about like, what is life? What is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of art making? All this kind of stuff. And which was kind of coinciding with me entering my mid 40s. And, I was also, suddenly surrounded by a lot of younger, artists who were like, I'm a young queer performance artist, or I'm a queer artist, and I was like, well, I identify as queer, but I'm like 40. I was like in my mid 40s. I'm like, what does that mean to use this word that like everybody uses now, especially if the word itself is supposed to signify like a kind of non-normativity? What happens if it's like the normative thing to do that everyone calls themselves queer? So those two fascinations, like, mortality, utility, queerness, those were spinning in my head. And then I went to see a show and I saw a performer who really fascinated me, Mickey Marr. And he really was like, stood out to me. And I was like, who is that person? Like what they have this kind of presence that's so unlike anyone else I've ever seen. So, you know what I mean? It's like I start to kind of combine the fascinations I have that are carried with me into a conversation with an actual person. And that also is exactly what happened with my most recent work, this bridge called My Ass, where I was thinking about Latinidad, I was thinking about identity.
The 1 hour, 40 minutes one.
Yeah. I was thinking about different relationships to identity and my own kind of, push-pull relationship with the concept of Latinidad and identity. And I thought, well, it would be interesting to kind of explore these questions with other Latinx artists. And so I, and then I just started like noticing who was in my world and who I thought that would be an interesting conversation to be having with. And so, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's usually, so first it kind of comes there. And then what happens is like, I assemble the people. Again, this is assuming it's not a solo. Then I kind of assemble people, and I basically just kind of like share the inspirations that are carrying me into the room. And sometimes that means literally like I bring books. Sometimes it's just me doing this, like blah blah blah, yammering on and on about something till it kind of infects the room. Usually it involves a lot of improvisational play, like for the last couple of years, I started doing this process where I was doing like 20 minutes of reading, 20 minutes of dancing, 20 minutes of writing, and like cycling through that multiple times. When we did it with this bridge called Mass, we started doing things like 20 minutes of reading, 20 minutes of napping, 20 minutes of moving, or maybe it was like longer periods of time, or like 20 minutes of reading, 20 minutes of napping, an hour of movement, right? So these different kinds of ways of tricking yourself into different mental states, and maybe kind of sharing a bibliography with people, but everyone's kind of reading different things around the selection of books, and then that kind of brings their perspectives into the practice that we end up identifying together as the practice for the project.
Don't forget to say no to the box.
The people who know my work trust that I'm going to take them somewhere. The people who don't know my work, whatever, if they have expectations, I imagine those expectations are usually ruptured pretty quickly. If you're expecting me to get out there and be like the clown queer guy, I've done that piece, but I also mess with it, and in this last piece, there's maybe a kind of anticipation of like, we're going to play like the brown Latino folks, but it's also messed with on purpose. So it's like, I don't really trouble myself with the audience's expectations. I get more concerned by the expectations of the people in the room that I'm working with, and the kinds of dynamics that are happening there. And sometimes I have to really kind of contend with, they have expectations, or they want to be directed a certain way, or they imagine that the work is going to take them on a certain emotional journey because they've seen my work and they've been affected by it. And so they think, well, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. And they don't realize, like, no, actually, I'm just like showing up to rehearsal every day confused, being like, okay, let's try this idea. Like, there's no master plan where I'm like, and we will feel this incredible transformation on Thursday.
Here's our agenda. So you're going to feel this emotion. Okay.
Yes. I mean, I can't plan that. So, that's what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about the process.
Focusing on process and trust.
Yeah, because the audience also like, oh my God, I talk about this all the time when I teach. It's like, who is the audience?
Yes.
The audience on Thursday is not the same as the audience on Friday.
No.
And the audience in, X theater that's like, 95% white people is different than X theater where the audience is, 20% people of color, right? It's like usually these numbers are difficult to equate. But so I also really I'm like really suspicious when we start to use the word audience as like this monolithic concern that's like, or like we think of audience as like when they do these tests of movies to see how many people like them. I don't want to think of my audience that way. I think of audience as like a group of individuals who are intelligent and intelligent enough that they got themselves to the theater somehow, and that are ready for an experience. And if they don't want to go there, they will either leave or close their eyes or bury their faces in the program, as people often do. Like they'll take care of their own experience, right? Like I'm not here to take care of you.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I'm not here to hurt you, but you're a grown up, I'm a grown up. Like deal with it.
Right.
So I don't. I feel like there's, especially in the US, there's too much anxiety about coddling the audience. Like, is the audience going to be okay with this? Are we going to? And I'm like, let them
Safe
take care
enough.
of themselves.
Yeah,
you
they're
know,
adults.
like,
I know what they're getting into whenever
That's
they
good that you
walk into
say
the
we're all
space.
adult.
Yeah.
we're grown,
Sometimes
you know.
it's
I mean, I
hierarchy.
get it. Like, you know, it's like, sure, if you want to put a trigger warning of some kind of loud, like there's going to be nudity or there's like maybe a loud sound or some flashing light, I get it. But I feel like beyond that, like you don't know what this person can or can't deal with, and we all have to kind of carry our own things that we can and can't deal with and understand
That's a really good point.
the boundaries of that.
I wonder, it just makes me think, because you're bringing this up, it just makes me think that sometimes we limit our own intellectuality. I don't know if I'm making that word up right now, but it's like, you're right. If they're willing to come in here, it's like, great. But if you like limit them by telling them all of these things are happening, or, you know, you might, it's just that we're not allowing that exposure, which they might take positively, or it might affect them in like in a really good way.
Or they might just have to live with a kind of discomfort, and that could be okay too.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's also like, I think that the thing that I talk about a lot with the work is like, it's okay to affect people in a way that they don't understand. You know, I mean, again, I'm not out to hurt anybody, but I also feel like there's a difference between hurting somebody and making them uncomfortable. And I have no problem with making somebody uncomfortable,
Right.
because that's something you can just kind of deal with and live with.
your
And
choice.
and unfamiliarity and discomfort are not the same as pain. And so I think that, you know, it becomes useful to understand, like, okay, I don't know what this is. Now, if you make the equation, I don't know what this is, and this person's trying to make me feel stupid because I'm not, that's on you. Like, I'm not trying to make anybody feel stupid. You know, like, I don't think anybody makes you feel XYZ anyway.
Right.
You know? So
How you receive it.
yeah, it's how you receive it.
Yeah.
And I think most of the time with people who are like, well, I didn't get it, or I didn't, no, well, you know, I feel like I need to know more before I walk in. If you literally just start walking them through a series of questions of like, what did you think? What were you feeling? What did it remind you of? What was difficult for you? You find that people actually totally got it. They totally understood it. It just may not be something they could like come out of and be like, it was about my daughter, you know, or like it was about, you know, when the dog came back and everyone was okay again. Like, you know, these kinds of like Lifetime Movie of the Week sort of concept of understanding, you know. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. So it's so nice to hear your perspective about all these ideas, but you also, I want to go back to your creative process a little bit and how you talk about improvisation being utilized to develop as well. And so given that we're also here at TDIF.
Sure, totally.
I was waiting for 1 month to ask this question.
We've been waiting for this question.
How do you define dance improvisation?
Yeah.
And why is it important in the current dance field?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on whether you're talking about it in relationship to performance or process, right? So I think it's different, but I have lots of different I think improvisation is basically the art of like doing something when you don't know what the hell's going to happen on some basic level. But I also think improvisation can mean having a kind of real-time relationship to the immediacy of your environment, combined with the tuning into your interior life and kind of tracking the movement from this kind of like extero to intero perceptual space. And I think part of why certain improvisers are interested in improvisation is because they want to kind of deal with the reality of the situation that they're actually in, not some sort of fictitious situation that got created and rehearsed 6 months before. Now, as I was saying today in my class, like I actually don't care so much about the delineation or distinction between improvisation and choreography. Like for me, this is a kind of like binary system that I'm like, I don't care. And I also see them as such a continuum. Like I use improvisation in my choreographic work. I think of choreographic scores sometimes when I'm improvising, you know, so it's like the there's a lot of movement for me between these terms, and I don't think like, well, I'm this, but I'm not that. I'm an improviser, but I'm not a choreographer. I'm a choreographer, but I'm not an improviser, because I think all choreographers are good improvisers.
Right.
And I think all improvisers are constructing choreography as they work. So it's like, this is for me like a useless distinction in a way. And I think it's a way of keeping people from realizing that they have rich interior lives and that they have rich perceptual faculties that they could tap into pretty easily, actually, by sort of dividing it in this disciplinarily, chopped up thing of like, well, now I'm taking my composition class and now I'm taking my improv class. And I'm like, that's just a function of the fact that we're in a system where we have to chop things up to satisfy some stupid university idea of learning.
Yes.
But like in terms of my body and what I can do with my body and how I express myself, my body is not like chopping myself up in that way. I'm not walking around being like, now I'm improvising and now I'm choreographing. I just think it's so silly. In terms of how I work with it, I work in several ways. I have kind of developed, I guess, a sort of belief system or a sort of ideological approach around improvisation. That's a combination of all my ancestors in the field and my current interests and some sort of way in which I'm trying to sort of break up or break out of assumptions of any given moment. So I think I was very influenced by work that I saw when I was young and living in San Francisco. I was very influenced by queer club performance. I was very influenced by protest. I got involved in protest and activism when I was younger. And continue to be, and I am very interested in stand-up and comedy, and I'm very interested in the different kind of ways in which people become perhaps more conscious of themselves when they're in front of others or being witnessed by others, and the way that that's like a somatically felt charge. So all of that gets kind of woven in to my approach to improvisation. I never use the word open. I never use the word free, because to me, those are kind of like really tricky, problematic words, especially the word free. I hate the word free.
Why you hate it?
Why?
Yeah. Free, yeah.
I think as a US based person, the word is so abused. It's disgustingly abused. And it's kind of like this horrifying word that's used to sort of promote US imperialism. And it's an imposition, and it's a way of deflecting, again, structural inequities and real oppression by being like, well, at least we're all free, and like, or this idea that like, I just feel free. And it's kind of like, that's some bullshit. That's a Coke commercial to me. It's not that. I think it's a really tricky word, and I hate when people use it in terms of improvisation, because I also feel, having done improvisation a lot, like, guess what? Maybe the first time you do improvisation in your life, you'll feel super free. By the 15,000th time you do it, you're gonna be like, oh, here I am doing that stupid ass thing I do. Like I'm like, and then it becomes about something else. It becomes about a different kind of conversation with self and the room or the interaction. So I'm not doing it to feel free, like
I mean feel free.
Or to be open. Like it's just open. I'm like, I'm not open. I don't know what that word means.
What are you talking about?
Like open. Like if it's really open, then I can take a sledgehammer and break down the wall. If it's really open, I can like pull someone's hair out. If it's, what I'm saying? So it's like there's always rules.
Right.
There are always
That's
codes.
true.
There are always strictures that I'm contending with. And I can choose to kind of break past them if I want, but I have to deal with the consequences. And in certain forms, that's what people do, Another, I think that the kind of code of what's permissible in terms of this open field is different at like a punk show or a noise show than it's going to be in like a nice little dance concert where you have to sit in plush chairs. It's like we have these different kinds of ideas about what is open in those places.
That's cool.
So I really went off on that.
You really did.
I had a feeling I just wrote about this recently too, so I think it's just like really in my head.
Create, discuss, and advocate for art. No box dance.
Can you talk about the master class you'll teach tomorrow? Maybe this is what you came for.
Oh yeah, well I've been
Can you
teaching
share
it already. My secrets. Can I share my secrets?
Yes.
No, but I can. I mean, well, first of all, I never use the term master class. Like that's a term that's like kind of foisted upon me, but I hate it.
What do you use?
I just say I'm teaching.
You're
Like,
teaching
you know,
a class.
I kind of in general try to keep things in the active, like instead of being like, I am a choreographer, I'm like, I make shows, I make performances. Like I like
You're
to,
an artist,
I like to kind of keep it in the like, well, what do I do? Like not just like, who am I or what am I? So I feel like, and I also feel like, yeah, because masterclass is a little bit like, come on, that's pretty top down. But
Masterclass.
yeah, I would just say like right now I'm trying to just kind of cohering some of my practices and I'm sharing, it's a short class. So I would just share these different approaches that I have to, some of the foundational aspects of my practice, which have to do with like just moving continuously and kind of tracking as you move, like your sensation, your feeling, and then finding ways of bringing that foundation into these different possible setups. And I think things that get talked about in there is like just noticing what your strategies are, like noticing, if I were to say to you, okay, turn the table over, and we would do it or you would do it. And then I'd be like, okay, well, how did you do it? Like kind of reverse engineering. Okay, I first moved the chairs out of the way. Okay, I took this side, I took that side. I did it by myself. I didn't wait for my friend, okay, so these are all kinds of like habits or presumptions or different kinds of ideas that you have about how something is done. And how would you maybe change those presumptions or play with those presumptions or like deepen them. So these are different kinds of things that I think about that I'm trying to sort of share with people. And I'm also, I think one of the other politics that I'm particularly compelled by right now is thinking about how we can think of this space as a space of difference. When there's multiple people in the room and like, so many situations in dance are about taking multiple people in the room and turning them to the same person or making them the same person or making them move the same, which I have no problem with as an ethic in the world per se. Like, I think there's a time and a place to do that. It can feel really satisfying to move with people together in the same action. But I think this, what I'm trying to do in these classes is kind of invite people into realizing like, actually, we can all hold these different kinds of energies in a group experience. So there can be the person who's super active while I'm super chill, and then I can get active and they get chill. Maybe we both get active together. And so compositionally, what if we were to retrain our eyes to understand that that's possible?
Have you seen a shift in how people consume dance with the evolution of social media, and how does social media influence your career?
Yeah.
I definitely have a lot of issues with it. I have a lot of problems. I have a lot of concerns, I would say. Do you want me to say?
Yeah, voice them out.
Okay,
we want to know all the things. Yeah.
I think one of my main concerns is that we surrender so much of our content and that we construct content for these enormous corporations that benefit, and we don't. Or we don't make money from it, but these motherfuckers do. Sorry, I curse a lot. So okay. You can bleep me out if you have to. So first and foremost, there's this kind of way in which we are agreeing to the confines of a platform that we are not constructing, and that whenever they put out the next update, it's like, oh, okay, now it's a different medium, and like there was no crowdsourcing, there was no city hall meeting, or town hall meeting rather, there was no like way. I mean, sure, we can all have a say. I guess we can tag them, but at the end of the day, it's like someone else the big guys are making that decision for us.
Yeah.
And I find that really disturbing. And yes, of course, when you're working with this, you're always working with an institution, right? Like it's like the same is true if I go and I make my dance and present it in some theater. I'm dealing with an institution, but it's a different quality of conversation, I think, and it's a different level of intimacy because I can spend months and months talking that theater space. But I don't think the same thing is happening with Instagram. You know, I think it's like a bunch of people in California who make this decision. What's the next cool thing we can do? Oh, look, what's the next way we can make some money off this thing? And blank, you know? And they're deciding the tightness of the frame, right? That sort of that square frame that we're all used to looking at. That time of the Instagram story that none of us can make longer. You know, we can only make it shorter by doing shorter bits. And we don't own it. They own it.
Yeah.
They own it.
Yeah.
They can do whatever the hell they want with it. And it's there kind of forever. And a lot of times we're just throwing this content away. So I feel like ethically that's just so weird that everybody agrees to that. To me is like loco. I'm like, that's some crazy ass shit that we're just like, yeah, it's fine. We will completely acquiesce to this like shitty platform, you know? And then content guidelines, I think are such bullshit, like community guidelines. That's a complete way. The fact that a woman can't show a nipple or that a person with a breast can't show a nipple on Instagram to me is like the stupidest. The stupidest. Like, come on. You don't want to look at someone's nipples. Don't follow them. Like, end of story. You know, especially when like I can just go to the browser and open up Pornhub. It's like, I don't like, who cares? You know, like, so to me, it's like, again, it's usually shutting down women, it's shutting down queer people, it's shutting down anybody who's not normative or choosing to present something that's not normative. That gets shut down or gets their account hacked or not hacked, but you know, like closed. So I feel like that stuff is like gross Big Brother shit, you know, that people seem to, again, be kind of okay with, you know? I mean, it's like, we're like, oh, it sucks. Oh, well, like, you know, it's like, you know, so I just think it's so weird, like that we're just so completely unperturbed by that. And then I think the other big, so that's like my thing about like the platform, right? And right now I'm talking most about Instagram because I don't really engage. I guess Vimeo is considered a social platform. Ha ha ha. I don't think it is one. Although I will say Vimeo gave me access to like the enormous nudist community that's online that I didn't know about. Because I have a couple pieces where there's nudity, right? And you know, you have to put like content warning nudity. And I think there's people who just troll that site for all the naked stuff.
Oh my God.
And they're like, you know, so I'm like, oh my God, that piece that has like 7 minutes of nudity, suddenly it's like been watched by 35,000 people.
Oh my God.
Your recent work?
No, just like I just think of different pieces, like, and I'm like, oh my God, it's just a bunch of like funny like art loving pervs, you know, of which I'm one, so I feel fine saying that terminology, but and I'm like, oh, that's kind of great. Like that access, you know, I always joke about like how like when I write grants now, they're like, who is your audience? I want to be like, well, I have a lot of like pervy nudists on Vimeo that really like my work.
Do you want me to listen?
Can I give you the handle? But, I think the other thing that frustrates me is like, one of my most hated like things in the world is like the phenomenon of the Instagram dance video where it's like single camera perspective and like in the studio and someone's just like some boring ass dance. They're like, look, I'm in a dance frame. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so boring. You know? And I find it so completely unresearched. It's the most like surface thing usually. Not always. There's some people who are incredible. I kind of hate it the most with like modern contemporary dance types things. I feel like if I want to watch that, I'll watch like a hip hop video. You know, like are people who like in those kind of more commercial studios that present that. I think that usually is much more interesting to look at because I think that also succeeds in the medium better. Actually.
Let me delete my one.
But I just find it. Because I guess I just think about like who my inspirations are as artists, and I feel like the people who inspire me were not satisfied with their first pass of something. You know, they were people who worked at something for years and years and years and years, and they developed a real intimacy with that thing. And then so by the time it kind of got out in the world, they understood what they were doing with it, whereas with Instagram, you have the opposite thing where like from the get-go, there's this notion of the invisible public that you're trying to please. It's not just like you're presenting it. If it was just about presenting it, but no, we're literally talking about trying to please them.
Right.
Because the metric is the like.
Right.
The metric for satisfaction
More
is the
followers.
like
Yeah,
and
the
the
more likes, the
followers.
better.
So there's this idea about mass, this idea about pleasing them. And I don't think that what I do in terms of my, my performance work, I don't, like I said, I know I'm not out to hurt people, but I don't, like the fact that you do or don't like it isn't so much the issue for me as long as you engage with it.
You are listening to Navox Dance.
The fact that like, queer spaces, a lot of them die out because everybody's just on Grindr, and so it's like nobody wants to go out and like cruise or flirt anymore. Or the thing that usually happens is if they even do go out, they don't come up to you. They like write you after, like, I saw you at the club, and you're like, girl, I was there. Like, walk up to me.
Yeah.
Like, I was right there. Like, what was stopping you from just saying hello?
Yeah.
The fact that like,
Right.
the fact that younger people now, like when you talk to them on the phone, they're like, what? Like phone? Who talks on the phone anymore? So I just think it's like these different kinds of ways in which, it's a boring thing to say. It feels very cliche. It feels very old guy to say this, but that I really think like I don't have a problem per se with the platforms themselves, but if they come at the expense of these other forms of relation that are good, right? It would be one thing if like having a conversation with someone was like a horrible, horrible thing that no one should ever do again.
Yeah.
But if it means that like, instead of dealing with you and your live performance, I'm just like
on the phone, scrolling.
Then I'm like, whoa, that's weird. Like if we replace something, and what does that say, right? So this is, again, I feel like the world's most boring old person right now speaking these things.
No, you're not.
But
I promise.
You're like not the only most boring person. Old is old. Turns out there's a lot of us.
Oh, yeah.
Hashtag no to the box.
Hashtag no to the box, Sarah. Well, all right. So as we continue with this interview,
I feel like the Inquisition, right? It's like the hell of Miguel speak.
No, I feel like you have so many great things to say, and given our time, it's just so limited. I want to sit with you and talk more with you, but
3 days.
Yes, let's do it. We have 3 days with you. Heck yeah. We have the rest. Yeah. So, as we continue on, we're going to get into a flash 4 questions. So very small questions, and you just kind of let us know, yes, no, or give us a little feedback or, whatever. So here we go.
So like my immediate response.
Flash 4.
Yes.
Okay.
Boom. Here we go. If you had to recommend a resource to our audience, what would it be? It could be a book, podcast, someone to follow, blog, YouTube channel, whatever you want it to be.
Oh my God. Oh God. I know I read these questions before, so I thought about them. I mean, I think social media is a good resource. I know, right? What a hateful thing. I'm like, you guys should look at YouTube. Bitch, please. I would say libraries. Like, I'm a library nerd. I love libraries. Part of why I moved to New York in the 90s was the New York Performing Arts Library, and I really like that. So there's that. Like, there's like always, there's like archives and libraries and things like that. I don't go to them as much as I would like to, but there's definitely that. I mean, I think online, there's different websites and stuff. I feel like I can't even think of one right now to give a bigger platform to. So yeah.
Do you have a specific book?
A book?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't have a book. I have lots of books. So like some of the books that have been really influential to me in the last couple of years are Cruising Utopia, The Then and There, Queer Futurity, which is by Jose Esteban Munoz, who was a really important Cuban-American queer theorist who lives and works in New York, who sadly passed away in 2013, but I think had a big influence on a whole generation of artists and scholars. And God, there's just so many books. I mean, I think when I was younger, I was really influenced by this book, This Bridge Called My Back, which is this anthology of feminist writings by mostly lesbians of color. It was compiled by Gloria Anzaldúa and Sheree Moraga. And I sort of returned to it again when we were making my most recent show, This Bridge Called My Ass, which is sort of obviously tongue-in-cheek, sort of play on that title. Those are two things. I mean, there's so many books. It's like so hard to even. I feel like it's like I'm melting under the weight of how many things.
You're good.
Yeah. I would say one more thing that really has influenced me in the last year is reading Edgar Villanueva's book, Decolonizing Wealth. He's a First Nations Native American a Lumbee tribe member. I can't remember if it's in North Carolina or South Carolina, but he is working in public policy and philanthropy, and he kind of goes into the history of the colonial nature of philanthropy and kind of its messed up origins and how that plays out kind of in a larger cultural context today, and what ways we could think of sort of quote-unquote healing or maybe undoing and redoing the idea of philanthropy according to indigenous practices.
Nice. Cool. Question number 2. What was the first dance you saw?
The first dance I saw, I probably would say it was my sister's cheerleading practices. When I was a kid, I would go with her to my sister's 5 years older than I am. I would go with her and watch and teach myself the routines. And then one of the first times I ever quote-unquote danced publicly was when a girl was missing and I stepped in for her. Yeah. Because I was like, I need the routine. You know? And then beside that, probably like West Side Story, the movie.
Ooh, cool. Okay, question number 3. Do you think social media has a positive influence on the dance world? Yes or no, or you can pass.
I don't think it's one thing or the other. I think, like I said before, it has positive and negative things.
Now, last question. What is your favorite social media platform?
You're torturing me with this. I mean, probably it's YouTube.
Before you go, Miguel, can I ask you one more social media question?
Oh my God, yes.
Before you go, can you
What's
share
my social media handle?
Yes.
I know, and everybody can just be like, you hypocrite. You hypocrite. So I'm on Instagram at a boy like that. That's my Instagram handle. I have a Vimeo channel which has almost all of my performance work on it. I don't know the name of it, actually. I think it's just like if you look up Miguel Gutierrez.
Yeah, I think it's Miguel Gutierrez.
And then I have SoundCloud where I've also posted some bits of things, not super like rigorous or regularly about posting stuff there, but I do have a bunch of stuff on there. I have Bandcamp, which is, I guess, it's not social media. It's just like a merchandising platform, but you can buy my music on Bandcamp. It's under the Belleville, which is a name that I've put music out under. What are my other platforms? I guess I do technically have a YouTube channel, but I never post. I mean, I think I have like 2 videos that I posted on it. Once I went to Vimeo just because I like the quality of Vimeo better for performance documentation. So, but yeah, I would say Insta is the place.
Insta's the place.
But I do take breaks from it. Like I took a 5-month break from it this year.
Oh, cool.
Because I was just like, after my show, I was like, I need to get off this thing. And I got to tell you, I didn't miss it at all. So go figure.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing for your time, Miguel.
It was a lot of fun.
Yes.
It's a good adventure. It was nice to get to know you.
Thank you. Thanks for wanting to know me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that's it, audience. Goodbye.
Follow me on Instagram, you guys.
Thanks for taking your time to tune into Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.